To continue the conversation that we've been having, that Patrick started by talking about disruptive forces. We're going to have live examples of two organizations that have navigated disruptive change and delivered outsized return. So we're going to learn from each of them. Anna, why don't you get us started just by giving a short version of the transformation that you and your organization have done, and then we'll hear the same from Lloyd.
Sure, and it might just be worth introducing us first, in that a lot of people, when they hear LSEG, they think the stock exchange. And it's worth just sort of framing that in that the stock exchange is now less than 5% of our revenue. And that's sort of the beginning of this transformation journey, in that our strategy is to globally, across multiple asset classes, provide the data that helps you decide what trade to make, support you to make the trade, and all the stuff that comes after it, and then allow you to evaluate what comes afterwards. And that sent us on a change journey. And probably two really massive steps for us was first the acquisition of Refinitiv, which was a moment in time when we were largely a markets business, building out that data piece to really help people understand what trades they wanted to make. The shift was buying Refinitiv. It was a 27 billion acquisition. It was buying what was the Thomson Reuters financial data business. And that built our position in data. But what we bought was a business that had been largely underinvested for a decade and had been losing share. So we bought it, as my CEO would say, knowing it was a fixer-upper. So that was the first big shift, and that happened 2.5 years ago. And there was a massive fixer-upping journey. But the world is moving so fast. I mean, you yourselves know the pace at which data is becoming more valuable. And we knew that we really needed to rethink that. Fixing up wasn't enough. We had to leapfrog. And so there, the second sort of big strategic move we've made is to partner deeply with Microsoft to embed our data and analytics into their products, to really try and rethink how financial services use data in their day-to-day life, because most folk in financial services are using Microsoft's products. So largely that's where we are. We're now executing on that change, but that's just a sort of snapshot of how we've gone from where we were to where we want to be, which is transforming financial services.
Fantastic. And we'll get into more of this as we get into the Q&A. So Lloyd, do you want to give the brief overview of the Experian story?
For sure, thanks. And some common themes. If you think of Experian, we've got a heritage that goes back a little over 125 years in different forms. And most people will come to the company thinking of us as a credit bureau. And for a lot of our history, that's what we were. But over the last 20 years, we've really transformed from a credit bureau into a broad data and analytics company. We have a very rich data set on over 1.4 billion people globally, hundreds of millions of companies and enterprises, and billions of assets, technology assets that we use to help prevent fraud in the digital ecosystem. So a very rich and broad company, much broader than we used to be in just when we were a credit bureau. And the background to our transformation really came from opportunity. If you think of what we do with data, it's helping the new digital economy and the new digital world do things digitally that we used to do in the real world. And over the last 20 years, as technology has advanced, the pace with which you can do things digitally has accelerated. So what we had the opportunity to do was to grow into that digital ecosystem. So opportunity-based, but you have to deliver that transformation to be able to do it. And we had 5 key things that helped us transform. The first was the center of the organization aligning around its purpose and our customers. Purpose being to help people and businesses power opportunities, and putting the customer at the center of everything we do. It's often said. It really matters as you transform the company. And then we had to do 4 big things inside the company. Get the best quality data at breadth and scale, put it on the best technology, give it to the best talent, and then wrap it all up with an innovation management system that could innovate and create value. And those 5 things taken together have really been the heart of the transformation journey that we've started.
Right, well, I've got specific follow-up questions to each of you based on what you said, but why don't we show the poll results just to inform the discussion. So the first question that we asked was, our organization faces an imperative to transform. So we had about 80% of people give that a 6 or 7 on a 7-point scale, average score of 6.2. Then we said that our organization has committed to it. The score comes down a little bit here. 5.8 is the average score. We've got 64% that give it a 6 or 7. And then the final question that just changed in real time, thank you to whoever submitted the last vote, up to 5.7 now. I'm happy with the progress our organization is making. The average score here is a 3.9, with 0% of people giving that a 6 or 7. So this is not a prepared question. I'm curious, if you were answering the poll, that last question, you both have done amazing things, you have transformed in many ways. Are you happy? On a 1 to 7, about your transformation, life we could talk about separately. But you want to start, Anna. How would you answer this question and why?
So it's a really interesting question because I feel quite conflicted about it. I mean, look, I'm, as anybody that works with me will know, I'm never happy with the pace of change. And I guess I have two thoughts. I'm really happy with the outcomes that we're delivering. And I think you have to pace the rate that you go at right for the organisation, so that the organisation comes with you. And so while I may not be happy, that's okay. If I was happy, it would be quite a skewed organisation. And we have to move at the speed that everybody will go at. I guess the other thing that I would say is the idea of a right answer bothers me. When you're delivering change, stuff goes wrong the whole time. There's multiple decisions that I've made that probably weren't quite the right decision. The point is that you've got to learn and course correct. And so the one thing I talk about a lot with my team is around, it's not about whether you got it right or wrong. It's about what we change from here for the next step. And are we really doing the analysis to understand the lessons learned and implementing them? So a bit of nuance, probably 6.
You anticipated what I was just going to ask. So, and it's interesting, reflecting on the idea that it's hard to know what the right answer is. One of the things that makes this such an interesting challenge, especially given all the forces Patrick talked about, even in hindsight, even if you knew everything that was going to happen, the right answer is not exactly clear. So a lot of it is the path dependency and the things that we learn as we go and do things. Lloyd, how would you answer this question?
So
how happy are you?
From happy to hungry, I'm always hungry for more. And I think that...
You sound a lot like my 7-year-old.
Yeah, just more's my number. It's always. I think if you think about our mission, there are over 1 billion people who exist outside the financial system. They don't have access to the traditional financial system. In the US, 28 million people don't have access to financial products in the way that many of us would see. It's 5 million here in the UK. So I'll be happy when we manage to transform that with data and creating trusted relationships, so those people are able to realize their financial goals inside the traditional financial system.
Right. So, and I want to follow up with something you said. You said, I'm never happy. I have to move at the pace of the organization. What has been, in your experience, the rate limiter? So if you could wave a magic wand and say, if I could just change this one thing, we could go faster. What would that be? Lloyd, you're going to get the same question, so be ready. And you're going to get the first question next time. I want to make sure that I have equal opportunity of this.
So I guess 2 rate limiters, and I'm stating the obvious here, capacity and capability. And we've moved, as we've gone through it, different things have rate limited at any point in time. Sometimes we haven't had the capability because we're changing into something we're not. And sometimes we haven't had the capacity to put it through as fast as possible. We looked at run our organisation just below breaking point. So we don't want to break anything, and we want to move with as fast a pace as change as possible. And that means you've got to be kind of always really watching capacity and capability so that you never go beyond it and you start to lose people.
There's a concept that's in a field known as adaptive leadership. Ron Heifetz is one of the big leaders in that field that talks about this difference between technical and adaptive change. A technical change is one where there's expertise, you can go and find it and go and execute. There's this chart that shows how much stress the organization faces. In the beginning of a technical change, you face a lot, then you figure it out, it's nice and simple, you're in your new place. In adaptive change, you don't even know how to frame the problem. It's the sort of thing that you all are dealing with. The challenge is you face a lot of stress, and there's a desire to get rid of the stress, so people want to shut down. They want to say, no, let's go back to the way we were. what the people in this field say is you have to keep your people in what they call, and this is a phrase only an academic could love, a zone of productive disequilibrium. A zone of productive disequilibrium where they are not happy, they're uncomfortable, but they're comfortable enough that they can be productive. And you let them get, you give them a little bit, you let them get, and then you can come up with the adaptive solution. So that's exactly, I think, what you're talking about in probably simpler language.
Yeah, you've just said it much more eloquently.
Well, I don't know.
Break anything.
I would take simplicity over the complexity. But that's exactly right, because too much, the system shuts down. And then you go backwards, not forwards. So Lloyd, the rate limiter in your organization, if you could wave a magic wand, what would that wand do?
I've heard it said that life is what happens while you're busy making plans. And the world changes around you all day, every day, and you have to adapt to those change crises. If we were sitting here 4 years ago, we wouldn't have known that COVID would have happened and how it would have changed the environment, or 6 years ago that Brexit would have happened and how that would have affected it. So you have to be able to adapt to change. And I wouldn't wave the magic wand, because that's life, and that brings opportunities as well as risk.
There's interesting, on this point about adapting to change, there's interesting research that a professor in the UK did, Richard Goodenough, I believe, about people who are lucky versus people who are not. You say, well, there's no such thing between people who are lucky and people who are not. There's no difference. But there actually is. If you study the people who report that a lot of lucky things happen to them, the difference is they have their eyes open. They're watching for, they're looking for things. The way that he tested this is he gave people a newspaper. Remember those things? Physical newspapers, go through it. And said, count the number of advertisements in it. Whoever gets the answer right fastest wins a prize. And there were certain people that would go through and and then someone would say 42. Say, how did you get the answer so fast? Because on page 2, there was this text that said, the answer is 42. Stop and say it. It wasn't an advertisement, but the people who had their eyes open, they saw it. So this idea that change is coming, it is inevitable. If we approach it with a wink in our eye and we look for it, it can be a good thing. If not, well, then we're going to, again, move backwards. This is really hard stuff, but great opportunities for people who think about it the right way. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about is we talked about some of the challenges you face. Is there anything in either of your journey that's actually been easier than you thought? So a thing that people in the audience might be saying, well, I can't do this because, where you actually say, actually, that's not that hard. Lloyd.
Galvanizing the energy of the people in the organization.
Anna's not happy with you because she was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
But say more.
Yeah, so I think once you've decided that you need to change, and I'll touch on that in a second, I think there's almost a relief in the organization that it's been seen, because most of the people can see it. They're living in the organization, they're dealing with it every day. And being able to tap into that and galvanize it, I think is easier than you think. But it requires an understanding of the need to change, not the need for different outcomes. Those are two different things. You have to have an understanding that where you are today won't get you to where you want to get to. And that's almost like the release mechanism for the organization.
So my version, and it's almost identical actually, but I'll give you my little story that says the same. I would actually call it organisational confidence. So when we bought Refinitiv, it's a business that for a decade hadn't had the investment that it had needed, and so had consistently lost share. And if you'd been a senior leader or anywhere in that organisation, it must have been quite depressing watching your competitive set go around you and not having the new product to take to the market. And it's really interesting how that influences mindset. So day one post-acquisition, great, we're going to change the world now, go for it. And the organisation didn't have belief that you could improve it, that you could start to gain share, that if you made investments, they would deliver. If you ran the business, little simple things, if you ran the business better, it would deliver revenue growth. And what's been the most fascinating and joyful thing to watch has been the little wins for each team that gives them confidence, and finding the mechanic to make sure that we're haloing those to build that organisational confidence, to go from a place of we can't because we never do because we're on the back foot to actually we can, and we're out there, and we've got our shoulders back and squared, and that's been a real journey, and it's exactly the same.
Winning is infectious.
Completely.
So I want to pick on this idea of quick wins, which is a big staple of the change management literature, really important thing to do. You both have talked about how the future is not predictable. It's not a straight line, which means there's going to be some losses too. So how do you get energy when good things happen? How do you, and we're beginning to talk a little bit more about culture now, how do you handle when things don't go as planned, when there's a quick loss or maybe even a big loss along the way? Has that been something that either of you have encountered? Anna, you want to start? Or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, given the scale of change we have taken on, almost certainly things were going to go wrong. We've gone from not investing much in new product to investing a lot more in new product. And of course, we didn't quite have all the capabilities to do all of that and get it all right first time. But this is where I think mindset is really important. And I think what we've done, and it's been incredibly helpful, is shift the mindset from it's all or nothing, right? You get to the end and you've either succeeded and it's brilliant or you haven't. It's looking at progress at each little step along the way. And actually for us, this has been really visceral in that we were the classic waterfall development organisation. Give us a nice dark room and we can shut the doors and build some tech and then we'll show it to our customers at the end of it. We've been on that journey of waterfall to genuinely agile, and Microsoft is pushing us loads further, loads faster. But it's been so helpful in shifting the conversation from right or wrong to, all right, what do we learn this time and how do we adapt? And I think that it's that move from right, wrong to learning journey, and of course things are going to go wrong, but let's learn from it quickly, that I think has meant that we don't think about loss. We think about learning, or certainly that's what we're trying to think about.
I'll pick up on that actually, because this shift from waterfall change to agile change is a really important concept, because, and the way I characterize it, what sits at the center of it is momentum. Momentum for change is so difficult to get. The ball is stuck and you have to get it moving. And when you have a waterfall approach to change, something goes wrong and the momentum's lost. And then the whole organization has to get behind it again. With agile development and agile change, it's a completely different approach. The ball's still moving, it's being tweaked and being directed. And it's an utterly different mindset. And it really helps you deal with bumps in the road. Because when you look back, it isn't that you failed, you had a bump. Okay, well, that's life.
So I want to offer a comment about this idea of mindset, and then I want Lloyd come back to this idea of they can see it, how we build momentum, and so on. And before I do that, I'm going to press this button here and open up another poll question for you, which is there are two big enablers that you have for transformation. One is more structural, one is more ways of working, like mindsets. What best describes what your organization needs to do to achieve your ambition? So that question will be up there as I offer my reflection and then ask a specific question to Lloyd. So reflection, the idea that there will be bumps, there are things that we will learn from, et cetera, ties very nicely into research and writing from Amy Edmondson at the Harvard Business School, who just last week introduced a book, The Right Kind of Wrong. She was the Thinkers 50. Stuart Craner's in the audience here. Hey, Stu. She was the world's #1 most influential thought leader in 2021, Amy Edmondson. And in the book, Right Kind of Wrong, one of the things that Edmondson does is to distinguish between intelligent failures and other forms of failures. There are lots of failures that are bad. When you go and do something that's stupid, you take thoughtless risks, you don't do your homework, and so on, those should be punished. An intelligent failure is the only way you could have learned is by doing something, and you went and experimented and bounded the risk around it and learned it. This is maybe a failure if it turns out your hypothesis was wrong, but in an agile sense, you move forward because you've learned this won't work, so we're going to do this instead. Her work is very good. Right Kind of Wrong is a book I would highly recommend. Very different question for you, Lloyd. So you talked about this idea of momentum. You said, we have people, the people there, they totally get it. Patrick and I were at an event with a client a few years ago, and they brought in a CEO from a very successful company that has driven an iconic transformation effort. And this CEO said, yep, my leadership team totally gets it. The grassroots totally gets it. The challenge I have in the organization is what this CEO called the frozen middle. The middle managers who are doing everything that they perceive to be the right thing to do, but it's more protecting yesterday versus creating tomorrow. Do you resonate with this at all? Is this a problem you had in Experian, or how did you smash through the frozen middle?
I think every organization in every period of change has something like that, but I wouldn't call it a frozen middle. I would call it just an embodiment of the status quo. People get into structures, and the job of senior leadership is to break down and recreate those structures. And it's why agile development and agile processes actually are so powerful, because embedded in their system isn't the rigidity that something changes, something stays the same until somebody decides to change it. It's forever changing. And I think the job of leadership is to set up that ecosystem of agile change that helps break that down.
And because if you say we can't predict exactly what is the right thing to do, we can know the broad forces, but the specific things that will happen, we need an organization that's adaptable, because only by having an adaptable organization can we be resilient.
But I think over my career, this concept has utterly changed. So the idea that there's a single truth held by the CEO to impart on the organization for the organization to be successful, it doesn't exist like that anymore. If I think of pushing the rock across the ice, our job is to sweep ahead of the rock to enable the organization to do the things that it needs to do, not to be the person actually pushing it.
So I want to comment on the question we have up here. 17 people have responded. 76% said we need to do both. We need to both change our structure and our ways of working. No one said we need to maintain what we're currently doing. If there was a bias between one of the levers, it was more around modifying our ways of working. So what I would like you both to do in just a second is to comment on culture, the human side of what you've done. Anything we haven't talked about, then I'm going to have one last question and then we'll call it a session. What does it really take to get the culture to shift in ways to make it, as you both have talked about, more adaptable, more open to learning, and so on? Before that, just a comment on this idea of there's no single source of truth. So we had Scott Cook, who was the founder and still active board member of Intuit, a leading financial services company, at an event a few years ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, our leaders are no longer decision makers because experiments make the decisions. What our leaders need to do is create the conditions that enable people to run experiments. Think about an identity crisis. If you've gotten to be a senior leader because you've made a lot of good decisions, and now today you have to enable people to experiment and they decide, that's a pretty big deal. So, culture. So Anna, you want to take this one first? What have you seen on the culture front that's worked?
Well, I think actually a lot of what we've talked about is deeply rooted in culture. So, we've talked about being a learning organisation. That is about creating a culture that empowers people to continuously correct. And you were just talking about, the challenge of the frozen middle. Actually, we do need some structure in the middle of the organisation to make sure that as we evolve, we actually continue to get stuff done as well. And so I think there's a big piece around empowering people to make sense of that. So I suppose that's a long way of me saying, in the middle of these changes, it can feel quite confusing, particularly if you're sitting in the middle of the organisation, because you've got the world changing around you, you've got a direction, you're empowered, you've got to deliver the day job, and you need to transform at the same time. And the decision making is going down. And I think that can feel quite frightening. And so I think cultural change is about remaining in that dialogue and hearing back from the employees the areas that are not making sense to them. Because that's actually how you work through internalising some of those trade-offs, which, if you're sitting in the middle of the organisation, can feel a bit unclear as you go through change. So nothing to add on the elements of culture. I guess it's more about how you affect that cultural change. And for me, that's about this continuous dialogue to understand why the bits that are sticky, because generally there's good reason.
Psychologically, they call that a holding container, where you say, we're going to create a metaphorical space or we can just deal with the mess, deal with the gray, deal with the sludge that will always come along when we do this, and have a space to process it to a degree. Lloyd, thoughts on culture?
Yeah, I think the enablement things in the organization, you have to measure them, and you have to tell people they're important. So when we put the client at the center of our organization, we established a whole mechanism, like many companies do, around NPS. But we doubled our NPS, and we told everybody that was a critical measure in the organization. The enablement of people. If you look at our Glassdoor scores, we've taken our Glassdoor scores from 3.3 to 4.3. An utterly different sense of what it means to work inside the organization and all of the engagement that sits around that. And so telling people what's important and what you measure and making that a broad piece rather than just financial outputs, that's really important.
So we've had a great conversation about 3 M's. We talked about mindsets, we talked about momentum, we've talked about metrics, and a whole range of other things. So we just have a couple minutes left. So what I wanted to do is offer you each a chance to provide some parting thoughts to the audience.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
So I think I'll pick up on a point that I raised earlier, which is ultimately transformational change doesn't come about unless you're unhappy with where you are today. Not unhappy with outputs, because most often companies are unhappy with outputs. But you have to be unhappy with where you sit in this organization, the things that you're doing and how you're doing it. And you have to get alignment across the leadership of the organization that something has to change in order to deliver those outputs. And that's actually the starting point. Nothing else can really happen until you do that.
And to build on that, in that with that clarity of ambition, if you can create an environment of confidence and the process and metrics to chart your progress, I think that is what creates that feeling of a winning organisation. So you've set your metrics. We also use NPS. We also have a raft of other metrics that are significantly, in a good way, challenging. As you see your progress towards them, that's what builds this virtuous circle of a confident organisation that feels it's empowered and enabled to deliver that change. And I think that's when you get real momentum across everybody.
Great. So I will say we had 2 questions that came in on Slido that you might have people who rush up on stage afterwards to ask you about, which was, how do you prioritize competing transformation initiatives? Did you make any structural changes to help drive the transformation program? I will note, one of my pieces of advice, both of these things are talked about to a degree in the wonderful transformation report that was written by Andy Shari and team, so please make sure you download that report and read it. The final thing that I will say before thanking the panel and providing a couple logistical points, as you listen to this, the humility that I entered with, I still have. You've done amazing work, both of your organizations. It's never finished. This stuff is incredibly hard. And the curiosity to understand more about these things, to say what works and what doesn't, what do we learn from it, how do we make things better. This is a grade A challenge. The zone of productive disequilibrium, where you have people comfortable with being uncomfortable, where they're running today and dreaming about tomorrow, where they're breaking systems while they're running systems. All of this, my colleagues know my obsession, all of these things are paradoxical. Now, we can say that a paradox holds us back, that these are tensions and we can't do anything in front of it, or we can choose to look at it at a unique opportunity to reframe, reimagine, to navigate disruptive change and own the future, which these organizations and the others in the transformation report have done.